If you ask a 16-year-old what they want to be when they grow up, you are frankly asking a fundamentally flawed question.
Oh, completely. It's a terrible question.
Right, because you're basically demanding this finalized, polished blueprint from someone who is, well, they're still actively trying to figure out how to pour the foundation.
Yeah, they don't even know what materials they're working with yet.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
forces this immense pressure to lock in a destination before they even know what kind of traveler they are. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really compelling piece of source material today titled What a Boarder Can Learn from Steven Bartlett.
And for those who might not know, Steven Bartlett is this wildly successful entrepreneur, podcast host, and just a major thinker on human potential.
Yeah, and what this document does is it takes his core philosophies specifically around like mindset, self-belief, and creating your own story, and it maps them directly onto the boarding school experience.
Which is such a fascinating application. I mean, the translation of these ideas into an educational environment is really what makes this text so valuable.
Totally. Because we're offering you, the listener, essentially a masterclass in personal growth and future readiness.
Right, because it moves completely away from that outdated model of education. You know, the one that treated students like train cars, moving along this single predetermined track toward a fixed career station.
Yeah, that industrial age model just doesn't work anymore. I mean, you are growing up or living in a world changing faster than ever before.
Exactly. Careers are evolving, the tools we use to communicate are transforming, and traditional pathways to success are just, well, they're no longer the only option. Preparing a student for a single destination is honestly a disservice. They need to be equipped to navigate off-road terrain.
And look, if you are listening to this right now thinking, well, I'm 35, I'm way past my school years, stick with us.
Oh yeah, please do.
Because the mechanisms of resilience and adaptability we are going to extract from this document, they apply just as much to navigating a corporate merger or like a midlife career pivot as they do to a teenager navigating a dorm room.
It's universal psychology, really.
Right. So the source begins with the psychological baseline. Before anyone can figure out what to do with their future, they have to figure out who they are.
Which leads directly to Steven Bartlett's first key message, which is that identity is not fixed.
It's an active, ongoing construction site.
Exactly. I mean, society kind of conditions us to view identity as a permanent state. We label teenagers incredibly early.
Right. Yeah. Like, you're the math genius, you're the athlete, you're the artist.
Right, and those labels just become these restrictive boxes. But the source argues that young people are actually in a constant state of discovery.
They're figuring out what matters to them.
Yes, their values, their interests, their ambitions, they aren't just unformed. They are highly malleable. And in a boarding environment specifically, developing an identity means consciously exploring new talents.
It's about stepping into unfamiliar roles.
Exactly. And reflecting on personal values and learning from both successes and setbacks. And a crucial realization, the text points out, is that this growth takes time. True psychological growth is a slow, iterative process.
I actually look at identity at that age less like a published hardcover book and much more like a rough draft of a novel.
Oh, I like that. That's a great way to put it.
Right, like it's covered in red ink, there are notes scribbled in the margins, and entire chapters are literally being deleted and rewritten overnight.
Yes, exactly.
But, you know, to rewrite a draft, you need a quiet, secure room to work in. And the text claims that boarding houses serve this unique function. They can become these safe environments for students to experiment and build confidence in their evolving sense of self.
They absolutely do.
But, okay, I want to push back on that premise for a second. Because, I mean, boarding school is famously full of routines and rules.
Oh, yeah, it's very regimented.
Right. We're talking strict schedules, mandatory study halls, uniform standards, curfews. How does an ecosystem with so much structure actually provide the safe space needed to experiment with a fluid identity?
It feels totally counterintuitive, right? But when you look at the cognitive load of a teenager, the structure is exactly why it's safe.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Think of the boarding house structure as a sandbox. A sandbox has these rigid, unmoving borders. If you remove those borders, the sand just washes away the moment you try to build something.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right, so for a student, the sheer predictability of a boarding routine, knowing exactly when meals are served, having designated times for academics, knowing an adult is always present, it eliminates their baseline survival anxiety.
So, like, the environment handles the logistics, so the brain doesn't have to.
Exactly. It provides a reliable safety net. The cognitive bandwidth that would normally be spent worrying about daily unpredictability is completely freed up.
Which means they actually have the energy to think about who they are.
Yes. When your fundamental temporal and physical needs are highly regimented, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex planning and personality expression, it can finally engage in creative play.
That makes so much sense. So a student can risk trying out for the school play or voicing an unpopular opinion in a debate.
Because they know the underlying safety net remains intact. They succeed or fail in that social risk. But the bell will still ring, dinner will still be served, and their world will not collapse.
The rigid borders of the sandbox allow for total freedom within the sand.
Precisely. They have the psychological freedom to test out new talents and reflect on their ambitions without feeling completely unmoored.
Which means once that cognitive bandwidth is freed up, the question becomes, well, how do they use it? If they accept that their identity is flexible, they can adopt a flexible way of thinking.
Which transitions us from who we are to how we approach the world.
Right, what Bartlett calls entrepreneurial thinking.
And we should definitely clarify that because the source strips this term of its corporate baggage.
Yeah, entrepreneurial thinking here is not just about starting businesses.
No, we aren't talking about teenagers drafting business plans or, seeking venture capital between history classes.
Right, nobody's pitching a startup in the cafeteria.
Exactly. Entrepreneurial thinking is fundamentally about curiosity, adaptability, and a willingness to learn. It is a posture of curiosity.
It's the agility to pivot when confronted with new information.
Yes. Boarders practice this by seeing challenges as learning opportunities, taking initiative in school or house activities, setting personal goals, and remaining open to change.
Okay, but let's ground this in reality for a second. If I am a student and I'm just trying to get through a tough week of classes and extracurriculars and I am exhausted, why should I care about thinking like a startup founder?
It's a fair question. It sounds abstract. But grounding it in the source text, a startup founder mindset in this context simply means seeing daily academic or social challenges as learning opportunities rather than roadblocks.
Okay, so what does that actually look like if, say, a student fails a crucial math exam or gets into a massive argument with their roommate?
It functions by shifting their locus of control. Without this framework, a failed math exam is perceived as an external event happening to the student.
Right, it feels like a permanent judgment on their fixed identity. They tell themselves, I am just bad at math.
Exactly. But the adaptive entrepreneurial framework reframes that exact same failure as a data point. An entrepreneur doesn't view a failed product launch as a permanent indictment of their character. They view it as the market providing critical feedback.
Why did it fail? What variable needs to change?
Right. By analyzing the bad grade or the roommate conflict as a puzzle to be solved rather than a tragedy to be endured, the student maintains their agency.
It shifts them from a state of victimhood to a state of agency.
Yes. They review their progress, adjust their study habits or communication style, and try again. And this flexible thinking prepares students for highly uncertain futures, because when the world inevitably changes, the student is ready.
That's conceptually beautiful, but it requires a massive amount of emotional armor. I mean, treating a public failure in the classroom as a mere data point is agonizing if you lack baseline confidence.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly hard.
Right. So if you don't have that confidence yet, how do you even start?
This brings us to Bartlett's concept of self-belief, which is perhaps the most critical psychological insight in the entire document.
The confidence paradox.
Exactly. We operate under this societal illusion that confidence is a prerequisite for action.
Oh, yeah. We tell ourselves, like, once I feel confident, I will volunteer to lead the project. Or, once I feel confident, I will try out for the team.
But the source dismantles this completely. Confidence doesn't always come first. Self-belief grows through action.
It makes me think of an analogy of building muscle. You don't get strong before you lift the weights. Lifting the weights is what makes you strong.
That is the perfect analogy. The action is the movement.
In boarding life, the source notes this momentum is built by doing very specific things. Speaking up in discussions or stepping into leadership roles and attempting difficult academic or extracurricular tasks.
The action generates the data, and the data eventually builds the belief.
But wait, is it just about blindly trying hard things, or is there a specific feedback loop happening here? Because blindly throwing yourself into difficult situations without a safety net doesn't automatically build confidence.
No, it often builds trauma. or at least complex.
Exactly. A student bombing a presentation and getting laughed at doesn't naturally lead to resilience. So, what is the specific feedback loop?
Well, the source highlights the emphasis on accepting feedback and recognizing effort. It's not just about taking action, it's about the analytical process of trying.
So, it's about what happens immediately after the action.
Yes. Crucially, it requires receiving input from peers or staff and realizing that the effort itself is the success.
So, they praise the friction itself.
Exactly. When a teacher or a dorm parent validates a student simply for wrestling with a problem, regardless of the outcome, it rewires the student's feedback loop. The dopamine hit is tied to the effort.
Wow, so the metric of success moves away from the final grade and onto the willingness to take the step.
Right. And when a student truly internalizes that effort, is a key ingredient of success, they learn to trust their capacity for growth. The result is that they become much more resilient and independent.
Okay, so taking action builds confidence, which is vital, but movement without a destination is just wandering. At some point, how do they ensure those actions are pointing them in the right direction?
This requires connecting present actions with a long-term vision.
Right, because if you're just generating confidence, you need to point it at something meaningful.
Exactly. And the source points out that when students understand their long-term goals, everyday routines feel more purposeful.
And this happens through concrete steps, right? Like creating personal development plans, participating in enterprise or creative projects.
Yes, and crucially, reflecting on how current study habits support future ambitions. It also involves learning from mentors, staff, and peers.
Boarding houses support this by actively encouraging conversations about purpose and direction. But I want to push back on the reality of student life here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Everyday routines in boarding life like mandatory study hall on a Tuesday night or morning dorm chores can be incredibly monotonous.
Oh, painfully monotonous.
Right. So how does having a distant vision actually change a random Tuesday night study session? How does an abstract idea of the future physically alter the reality of staring at a biology textbook?
It acts as a translation device. As the source notes, reflecting on how study habits support future ambitions changes the framing of the activity.
How so?
Well, without a personal vision, sitting at that desk for 2 hours is an extrinsic demand. It's a chore imposed by the school.
And the brain actively resists it, which requires immense willpower.
Exactly. Yeah. But if the student has mapped out a vision, the study hall undergoes a psychological translation. The routine is no longer a chore imposed by the school. It becomes a deliberate stepping stone chosen by the student.
Ah, so the biology textbook isn't an obstacle placed in their way by an authority figure. It's a tool they're using for their own goals.
Right. The motivation becomes intrinsic. The cognitive load drops because they are no longer fighting the task. They are leveraging it.
That makes total sense. So we've explored identity as a rough draft, a flexible entrepreneurial mindset, action-based confidence, and the power of long-term vision.
Yes, all the core pillars.
So what is the ultimate payoff of combining all these elements within a boarding school environment? What's the so what for boarding life?
The so what is that boarding environments provide these unique opportunities for leadership, initiative, and self-discovery. By supporting this future-focused thinking, it leads to greater motivation.
Better decision-making skills.
Exactly, and increased confidence in navigating change. The ultimate goal is stronger preparation for life beyond school.
The source text has this amazing phrase. It says, students transform from merely being learners to being creators of their own journeys.
That is such a powerful way to frame it.
I highlight that phrase because it's the ultimate aha moment of the document. It completely flips the script from passively receiving an education to actively architecting a life. You aren't just sitting at a desk waiting for information, you are utilizing your environment.
And that is the true value of the boarding experience. It's not just about passing exams or getting grades.
No, it's an incubator.
Exactly. It's an incubator for the exact kind of self-directed decision-making needed for the evolving modern world we mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Which brings us to the wrap-up of Steven Bartlett's core philosophy here. You do not need to have your future fully planned out right now.
You really don't. The pressure to have a finalized blueprint is just an illusion.
What truly matters is developing the mindset to keep learning, adapting, and believing in your potential. Success begins with self-awareness and the courage to take action.
And boarding life offers a powerful space to shape your story one decision at a time.
Exactly. So we want to end with a specific, thought-provoking question for you, the listener. The source tells us that confidence grows through action and that we need safe spaces, those sandboxes, to experiment with our identity.
Right, to lower our anxiety enough to try new things.
So think about your own current environment, whether you are in a boarding school, a corporate office, or your own home. What is one safe space you have access to right now where you could take a single low-stakes action today to experiment with a completely new part of your evolving identity? Find your sandbox and take the step.